A snowstorm. A distress signal from deep within the mountain forest. And in the middle of it all, a senior German shepherd standing still in the snow, unfazed by the raging wind. When Nurse Emery Lane and her partner stop their ambulance on the mountain road, they have no idea this dog is about to lead them into a night that will change everything. What they find beneath the snow is far beyond anything they imagined. Was it instinct memory or an unfinished promise? Watch until the end to discover who this dog truly was and what he was still trying to protect. The wind screamed through every gap in the window pane, slamming against the body of the vehicle, as if it were trying to rip the entire cabin off the road. Snow didn't fall in peaceful silence like in winter postcards. It twisted violently, howling, hurling thick clusters of white against the windshield, burying the road beneath a dense, colorless fog until the painted lane markers vanished. The old ambulance jolted with every hidden pothole. It hit its amber lights sweeping across the swirling white haze like headlights slicing through frozen soup. Behind the wheel, Emery Lane gripped it so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. She was 36, lean and sharp, like a winter branch. Her skin was pale with cold, her cheekbones defined by years of wind and silence, and her ashen gray eyes rarely stayed fixed on anyone for more than a second or two. Her dark brown hair was tied in a tight knot at the base of her neck, concealing the softness people used to call feminine grace, back when they still mentioned it before speaking about the child she lost. Once Emery had been warm. At least that's what the faded family photos in the tin box on her high shelf suggested. But one March afternoon, a pickup truck veered off a curve above the hill and took with it her 6-year-old son, leaving behind a void that no words could reach. Since then, she'd left the city, relocating to the Red Elk Mountains to serve as the lead nurse for a small emergency response unit near the Montana border. She didn't talk much, didn't smile often, but she had never missed a single call. Rain, snow, or storm, she showed up. "You sure this isn't a false ping?" Wes Calder's voice broke through from the passenger seat, his eyes flicking toward the flickering GPS signal. Wes was a few years older, broader in the shoulders, his voice low and steady. The kind of man who always wore thick jackets and kept a warm thermos close. A former firefighter turned emergency medic, he was the kind of person everyone in town trusted, though few actually knew anything about his past. "The signal came from our internal system," Emery replied, eyes still fixed on the road blanketed in blowing snow. "Could be an automatic distress beacon, or someone just managed to hit the send button before they lost contact." "From where Hallowed Ridge," she said simply. Wes gave a low whistle. "That ridge is remote. Nobody goes up there this time of year. Forestry station closed back in October." Emery didn't answer. Her hands stayed on the wheel, but her mind circled around the same thought. Who would send a rescue signal from so high up during a storm like this? And why was there only a single coordinate, no name, no message? Nothing but silence. The ambulance turned onto a narrow mountain path. The tires squealed lightly as they rolled over layers of snow and ice. Ahead was only white, thick, undisturbed, impenetrable. The vehicle's headlights cut through it faintly, forming a blurry line between safety and the edge of the cliff. Wes put in his earpiece and radioed dispatch. "This is EM-12. We're approaching the signal source near Hallowed Ridge. Source data is inaccessible. Can you confirm? Are any other units en route? A pause." Then static crackled, followed by Lisa's voice. "The night dispatcher. EM-12 confirmed. All other teams are currently diverted south to handle the landslide on Route 56. You're the only unit within a 30-mile radius." "Sounds like a great night," Wes muttered as he pulled out the earpiece. Emery glanced at the analog clock on the dashboard. Just shy of 11. The snowstorm was forecasted to last all night. If someone really was out there, they were their only chance. I thought I was done with nights like this, Wes said, leaning back and pressing his palm against the window heater. You could have stayed at the station, Emery said flatly. Wes chuckled. And let you drive alone up a mountain in a blizzard? Come on. Who do you think I am? The question hung in the air. Emery glanced sideways. Their eyes met briefly, hers neither warm nor cold, but still like a river frozen mid-current. Then the headlights caught a shape up ahead. Emery lifted her foot from the gas. Snowdrift, Wes asked, sitting upright. She shook her head, eyes narrowing. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't a rock. It was alive. The figure came into clearer view as the vehicle slowed, broad still and unmistakably a dog. A German shepherd, thick-coated, its black and tan fur dusted in frost. Ears, tall eyes, glowing cold under the beam. It stood squarely in the middle of the road facing them, neither threatening nor afraid. Waiting. The vehicle stopped. Wes frowned. Stray Emery didn't answer. She reached for the flashlight, her fingers tightening around the door handle. Don't tell me you're getting out, Wes said under his breath. Stray dog, middle of the woods, weather like this. Look at its eyes, she replied. That's not a stray. It knows exactly what it's doing. She opened the door. The wind crashed in like a flood, icy and unforgiving. Snow slapped her cheeks, but Emery stepped forward, slow, deliberate, toward the silent figure. The dog took a single step back, gentle, unafraid, then held still. It let out a low, quiet whine, not for itself, but as if calling attention to something behind it. Emery stopped. Her heart picked up. A strange sensation crept in, like someone was calling for help wordlessly. Behind her, Wes stepped out too, flashlight in hand. Its beam swept along the snow-covered edge of the road. The dog moved again, one step, then turned, beginning to walk toward the pine trees. Emery watched it, then whispered, I think it wants to lead us somewhere. And so they followed, not out of blind trust, but because from that moment on, everything around them felt intentional, like the unfolding of a story they hadn't written. Somewhere beyond that snowy curtain, something was waiting. A small life still clinging to a final breath. Snow lashed across Emery's face like cold blades, but she didn't blink. She stood just a few steps from the dog, watching its quiet, motionless frame. Its breath rose in soft wisps. It didn't shiver. It didn't retreat. It simply waited, as if this wasn't its first storm, and as if it had long known how to face humans. In the middle of a blizzard, Wes stood a few steps behind his flashlight, sweeping across the forest's snowy edge where the ground was covered in thick, untouched white, like a blanket no one had yet folded. He said nothing, but his gaze followed every movement Emery made, and every subtle shift of the silent creature in front of them. The dog didn't bark. It didn't growl either. It just stood there, still and steady, then slowly turned its head, its eyes leaving hers to gaze toward the snow-clad woods. Then it moved, one step at a time, light assured, gliding over the snow as if every footfall had already been decided long before. Emery followed. We're really following a dog, huh? Wes muttered, not loudly, but each word was deliberate. That's not just any dog, she replied, eyes forward, voice calm. They stepped past the road's edge, where the snow thickened and softened, swallowing each footfall deeper than the last. The wind was stronger here, funneling along the mountain's flank, causing the old pine trees to creak like tensioned wires straining beneath the weight of the sky. But ahead, the shape of the dog remained distinct, bold like a block of coal set against paper white. Its tail hung low, its body taut and focused. Every so often it glanced back, checking if they were still behind. Do you feel it too? Wes asked, his beam cutting across moss-covered trunks, blanketed in white. Feel what? It's not leading us like some panicked stray. It's moving like it knows the path. Emery didn't respond, but deep down she felt it too. Something about the way it walked, through snow, through night, made her realize they weren't the ones guiding this moment. They ventured deeper into the forest. The road had vanished behind them, the amber lights of the ambulance now just a dim blur far away. The only sounds left were the crunch of snow beneath their boots, the sharp breath of the wind, and their own steady breathing. Ahead, the dog's silhouette still moved forward, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to hold their rhythm. Then suddenly, it stopped. It stood at the edge of a shallow clearing where the snow had thickened and dipped downward like a hand had pressed into a bedspread. Emery stepped closer and froze. There in the snow was a hollow, round, sunken, slightly tilted, as if someone had scooped out a small pit with bare hands in the middle of the cold. Along the edges, bits of dark fabric peeked out, and something metallic caught the light. She knelt down, brushing aside the fine snow with careful hands. Just beneath, a strap, a scrap of floral cloth, a fur-lined hat, and then a tiny finger. Her breath caught. Wes dropped to his knees beside her, already pulling on gloves, his hands digging faster. "This is," he whispered, "a child." Emery said, her voice low and trembling, "A baby girl." They kept digging until the entire tiny body came into view, wrapped in an old coat layered with thin blankets, limbs curled in tightly from the cold. She looked only a few weeks old. Her skin was pale lips, tinged a bluish gray. But her chest, it rose, barely, weak but real. "She's alive," Emery whispered, her voice cracking. "Wes, the thermal kit, now." Wes fumbled in his pack and passed her the emergency wrap as she peeled off her own jacket, swaddling the fragile body in its warmth. Heat slowly began to radiate from the thermal blanket, aided by heat packs. She pressed gently against the baby's limbs. Emery held the infant close to her chest, skin to skin, anchoring her with every steady heartbeat. The dog, the one that had stopped their car, sat a short distance away, watching. Wind rustled through its thick coat, but it didn't flinch. Its eyes stayed fixed on the child in Emery's arms, as if guarding, or waiting for a sign. "We need to get back to the vehicle," Wes said, tension lacing his voice. "We can still make it, if we move fast." Emery nodded. She wrapped the baby securely, rose to her feet, and began stepping cautiously back through the thin crust of snow. "You going to name her?" Wes asked as they retraced their steps. Emery didn't answer right away. She held the child tighter, feeling the faint rhythm of breath of life blooming again beneath layers of warmth. Then, glancing to her left, she saw the dog walking beside them, silent, close eyes never leaving them. Her name, she murmured, steady now, should begin with snow and end in hope. The dog lifted its head. For the first time, it stepped closer, and in that fleeting moment, amid snow, wind, and hush, Emery felt a gaze that pierced straight through the years behind her, gently opening a door she once thought would stay locked forever. The snow thickened, blanketing the world in a cold that seemed endless. Each step sank deeper. Every breath felt woven into the wind. Yet Emery's stride remained constant, not because she felt warm or strong, but because ahead of her, guiding each step, was a shape she trusted without explanation. The German shepherd, its coat a swirl of sable and ash, thick like the woods they passed through. Sable. She silently named him that in her mind, a name no one had given, yet somehow had been waiting in her heart all along. Sable didn't rush. He didn't turn back to urge them. He just moved, at a perfect pace, as though leading humans through the snow was something he had done all his life. Now and then, he vanished behind a tree trunk, but always reappeared, tail low ears, perked gait, steady as breath. "We've gone deep," Wes whispered, flashlight scanning the shadows. "GPS is fading." "Do you see him stopping?" Emery asked quietly, eyes fixed ahead. "No. But he knows the way, I swear. He's been here before." The pine trees stretched tall on either side like fingers raised toward the sky. The wind whistled through the branches, whispering in a forgotten language. Snow continued falling, gentle but persistent, softening their tracks within minutes. But Sable's paw prints remained clear, deep, even spaced like the steps of a soldier who knew the route by heart. Emery tightened her grip on the baby, still unconscious but warmer now. She could feel the pulse, faint but determined, pressed against her chest, like this tiny life was knocking, asking to return. Then, Sable stopped. He stood still in a shallow dip, where the pines gave way to a wide-open patch of untouched snow. Wes's flashlight swept to the right, catching something beneath the powder. A shape small, soft, and almost fully buried. "Wes," Emery breathed. They stepped forward together, and this time it was Emery's flashlight that halted first. Its beam caught on a corner of pale pink fabric edged with lace. Snow clung to it in fine, frozen dust, as though time itself had tried to bury it. But something, or someone, refused to let it disappear. "It's a bundle," Wes said, immediately dropping to his knees. "Light. But there's something inside." Emery knelt beside him. Carefully, she brushed away the snow layer by layer. Beneath the fabric revealed itself, a worn woolen scarf wrapped around something soft, round, and small. And then, as if the whole forest held its breath, a tiny hand slipped out through a fold in the cloth. 5 delicate fingers curled inward, so fragile, they looked as if a single gust might sweep them into the wind. But they were there, still, real. "Another baby," Emery breathed, her voice shaking from both cold and disbelief. Wes had already pulled on a pair of medical gloves. "There's breathing, weak, but it's there." "My God." Emery gently unwrapped the layers, checking the infant's skin. It was pale but not blue. Her heart beat slowly, but steadily. Around the small wrist, just like the first baby, was a faded plastic hospital bracelet, and the name printed on it caught the beam of her light, Nora L. "There's a name," Emery whispered, her eyes fixed on the band. "This one's Nora." Sable sat nearby, head tilted slightly, watching them, as if checking that the humans were doing what needed to be done. This can't be random," Wes murmured. One baby was already hard to believe, but 2, both hidden like this, both led to us by this dog. "It's not random," Emery said firmly. "This was meant to happen." She gathered baby Nora into her arms, cradling her like the trembling world itself. And this time her thoughts weren't on the snow or the cold. They were on the strange clarity of what was unfolding. A dog, perhaps one who had once lost something, was now finding a way to give something back to the world. One breath, one heartbeat, one forgotten life at a time. "We have to move," Wes urged again, his voice taut. 2 babies. Time's running out. Sable stood. He didn't bark. He didn't dash ahead. He simply turned and began walking, guiding them once more, as if the path was long and what needed to be seen wasn't over yet. The wind whistled through the forest like voices from another world. But among the cold layers of snow and silence, another sound threaded its way in, so soft it felt like mist breathing. Fragile yet persistent, as if the smallest spark of warmth might be enough to keep it alive. Emery held Nora tightly against her chest, feeling the icy skin against her own. The baby breathed in, short, whispering pulses, nearly lost to the storm. But there it was. Life. A life she could feel. A life she could hold. "This is a soldier's jacket," Wes said suddenly, inspecting the layers wrapped around the baby. "Old, but still warm. It smells like smoke. And someone's presence." Emery peeled back the fabric gently, revealing the tiny wrist and its plastic bracelet. Under the crust of frozen snow, the letters emerged, faint but legible: Nora L. "She has a name now," Emery murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Nora. The name fell into the quiet like a breath newly found, a fragile truth rescued from being lost. Just a few paces away, Sable sat motionless on a snowy mound. His body was dusted with frost, back curved in silent readiness, ears alert toward the child. But his gaze remained on Emery, as if weighing the rhythm of the woman's heartbeat against the one she now held. He didn't bark. He didn't push them forward. He simply sat, solemn and unmoving, as though even the storm had stopped to honor the sacred space between a soul that had kept its promise and a life freshly pulled from the edge of forgetting. How does a dog even find two babies like this? Wes asked, his voice low, awed. Maybe. He didn't find them, Emery replied, eyes still on Nora. Maybe he's been guarding them all along. Wind rushed through the tall pines, knocking snow loose from the branches. The flakes fell in soft clusters onto their shoulders. Wes pulled an emergency thermal coat around the child. Snow landed on Nora's face, but she didn't stir. Only her breathing remained, shallow and slow, like she was listening to some melody from a dream she hadn't left yet. "We need to move now," Wes urged again. Any delay could drop her temperature dangerously low. Emery nodded. She tucked the old jacket back around the child's body, like sealing a memory meant to be preserved. Then, pressing Nora close, she turned toward the narrow trail they had come through. Sable didn't move. He sat exactly where he was, lifting his head only slightly, then lowering it again. His eyes followed them, holding every step, every breath they took as they departed. Emery slowed, hesitated. Then she turned back, looking at him directly, and whispered a quiet truth. "Thank you for staying." The dog raised his head. His ears twitched, not in response to the wind, but as if he had heard enough, understood everything, and accepted it. Wes took the lead with the flashlight, carving a path through the trees. Snow reached up to their knees. They pushed through, breathing hard. In Emery's arms, baby Nora was wrapped in warmth and pressed to her skin. The infant didn't cry. Her breath was stronger now, and her presence lighter, but more alive. A distinct scent clung faintly to her hair, like wood smoke, like skin, like memory. But nothing fearful, something protective. At last the trees began to thin. They reached the edge of the forest, where the blank road opened once more, and the ambulance sat waiting, silent and still beneath the storm. Snow had gathered on the roof, painting strange, swirling patterns across its surface, as if nature itself was signing a miracle into being. Wes climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. It groaned, then roared awake like something pulled from a long frozen sleep. The heater kicked in moments later, blowing waves of warmth into the cabin. In the back seat, Emery held Nora close, like holding a part of her heart that had long been buried in ice. The baby didn't stir. Her eyes fluttered once, gently, as if whispering something too soft to be heard aloud. The wristband remained on her tiny arm. The snow had melted from its surface, and the name printed there, Nora L., now shone clearly under the pale dome light, like a promise just beginning to unfold. Outside the windshield, the forest had vanished from view. But in Emery's mind, the image of Sable remained, etched clearly like a single point of light in a canvas of white. Something that didn't need words or explanation yet was enough to help someone lost within themselves find direction again. The wind had softened. Snow no longer pelted the windows like it had when they left the woods. Now it drifted down slowly like pale punctuation marks, fading mid-sentence, falling into forgetfulness. The ambulance slid past the low wooden buildings of the field clinic, its amber lights casting a soft circle on the snow-covered ground, like an embrace sheltering the fragile hope trembling in Emery's chest. The baby, Nora, was now wrapped in thick blankets. On the emergency cot, the heater turned up to its highest setting. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor echoed gently through the room, matching the calm breaths within it. Her skin had regained a healthy flush, her lips no longer tinged with blue. Tiny fingers twitched beneath the covers, moving lightly, as if searching for something once familiar. Dr. Moira, a woman in her early 50s, with cheeks red from the cold, stepped beside the bed, gently checking the baby's temperature and pulse. "She's stable," she said softly. "It's strange. No signs of serious trauma. If you'd arrived 15 minutes later, it could have been a different story." Emery nodded her eyes, never leaving the child. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But something inside her chest felt like it was slowly unfolding. Something she hadn't felt in years. Not since the day she lost her son in that accident on the ridge. Wes handed her a cup of hot tea, setting it quietly on the table before taking a seat. "It's like she was placed in your arms for a reason." Emery said nothing. Her gaze remained fixed on Nora, as if every breath the baby took carried a message she needed to understand. Night had fully fallen. Outside, snow blanketed the wooden walkway. The wind brushed across the roof of the clinic in slow, steady tones. Inside the small staff room, Emery opened her phone. Her hands trembled. Not from cold, but from the urgency of something she couldn't yet name. She opened her photo gallery, the only image she had managed to capture of the dog before they left the forest. In the haze of headlights and fog, Sable stood still, half shrouded in mist. Yet even in blur, his eyes shone with something strange, something knowing, like a soul that had passed through fire and frost, and now stood guard for those who came after. She typed a short caption, "Does anyone recognize this dog? He led us to an infant in the woods near Hallowed Ridge this afternoon. The baby is safe. Please share if you have any information." She posted it to the Mountain North Wilderness Community Group, where locals often shared missing person alerts, avalanche warnings, and occasionally photos of animals seen wandering that invisible border between wilderness and humankind. Wes glanced over her shoulder. "You think someone's seen him before?" "Not sure," Emery replied. "But those eyes, they belong to someone who once belonged somewhere. That's not a stray." Within minutes, notifications began pouring in. Dozens of shares. Comments scrolling fast. But one line stood out above the rest. "I know him. That's Sable. He was a K9 in the Iron Vale Rescue Unit. Went missing after the tunnel collapse 4 years ago." Joannie Mack, retired rescue worker. Emery tapped the commenter's profile. The avatar was a silver-haired woman in a reflective vest standing beside an old mining sign. Behind her, barely visible, was the unmistakable silhouette of a German shepherd. Broad frame, proud posture. She sent a message instantly. "Do you have any old photos of Sable? I need to confirm if he's the same dog we saw today." The reply came back almost immediately, as if Joannie had been waiting for someone to ask. "I do. And if that really is Sable, then you're standing in the middle of a story that was never finished." A moment later, a photo album arrived. The first image showed a snow-covered mountain pass. A young man in a rescue uniform stood against the frozen backdrop, and at his side sat a German shepherd, sharp-eyed ears tall, sitting with quiet precision. A red cross scarf around his neck marked him unmistakably. Emery zoomed in, comparing every detail: the angle of the ears, the spacing of the eyes, the ridge of the nose, and a faint patch of silver fur on his front leg. It matched. Wes looked over her shoulder. "It's him." Emery nodded slowly. Her heartbeat slowed too, like she had just brushed up against a memory that didn't belong to her, but somehow had found its way in. Joanne sent one final message. Sable disappeared after his handler, Alex Morel, died in that collapse. We searched for months, but by the first winter, all signs were gone. No one's seen him since, until now. Emery sat in silence. In her mind, the image of Sable walking through the snow returned. No panic, no urgency. Just the calm purpose of a soul who hadn't finished his mission. Beyond the glass wall, Nora stirred in her sleep. Her eyes remained closed, but one tiny hand lifted, reaching for something unseen. Wes whispered, "What if? He's still doing his job, even if no one's giving orders anymore." Emery didn't answer. She looked from the old photo to Nora as though two distant fragments had just found their way back to each other, across a field of white and silence. Night settled in. The snow outside fell gently like a deep exhale after a day too full to speak. But in the makeshift break room of the Hallowed Ridge Clinic, the lights hadn't yet gone out. Emery Lane sat at the desk, chin resting in her palm, eyes fixed on the old laptop screen. A message thread remained open. The final line read, "If you want to know more about Sable, call me. My name is Harriet. I worked with Gavin Holt, Sable's original trainer." Emery hesitated, then clicked the call button. The ringing echoed softly in her headset, once, twice, 3 times, until a woman's voice answered low and calm, with the cadence of someone who'd spent her life between mudstone and steel-toed boots. "You're the one who found Sable, yes. My name is Emery Lane. I'm head nurse at Hallowed Ridge Clinic. Thank you for answering." "No need to thank me," Harriet said gently. "You just did something we once believed impossible. You found a piece of the past we thought had been buried beneath stone and silence." Her voice paused, then softened further. "Do you have time? I'd like to tell you about the dog you just rescued. Or perhaps more truthfully, the one who just rescued you." Emery leaned back in her chair. "I'm listening." Gavin Holt was a sergeant with the Montana Fire Unit 14 Tactical Rescue Team. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to shout to be respected. He just stood there, calm, steady, and people instinctively knew what needed to be done. When Sable was brought into the training center, he was just over a year old, part of a specially selected litter with heightened biological scent detection. "Biological detection?" Emery asked quietly. "Yes, but not like blood or explosives." Sable had a rare ability to detect the faintest human heartbeats, especially those of newborns. He was trained in a joint program between the rescue unit and the Pediatric Institute in Bozeman. During drills, when infant cries were broadcast from beneath rubble, most dogs followed the sound. Sable, he found them even when the speakers were turned off. He sensed them. Somehow. We never understood how. Emery swallowed hard. The image of Sable sitting silently a few feet from baby Nora flashed in her mind. Those quiet, alert eyes glowing with purpose. Gavin once said that every training night, if there was a child in the base camp, Sable would find a way to lie next to the crib. He never made a sound, never pushed for attention, just lay there, still as a blanket, warm as protection. Harriet paused for a moment, as if holding her memory gently, afraid it might break. That year we were dispatched to a tunnel collapse in the southern Iron Vale Range. 6 miners trapped underground, every exit sealed. Gavin led the team into the deepest chamber. Sable went with him. And you can probably guess the rest. Emery's voice was quiet. Gavin didn't make it, no. He pushed a worker out of the corridor seconds before the roof came down. When the secondary team finally dug through, they found Sable sitting beside him, covered in dirt and coal, but alive. He wouldn't leave, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. We had to sedate him to bring him out. Emery gripped the arm of her chair. After Gavin's funeral, Sable was temporarily assigned to another handler. But 3 nights later, he vanished. Since then, no one had seen him. Some believed he roamed the old mining site. Others thought he died from the cold. Harriet's voice, though lower now, carried a steadiness born of grief already lived through. The truth is, we never stopped hoping. We just stopped saying it out loud. Every time I heard about a rescue that defied explanation, I wondered if it might be Sable. And now, thanks to you, we know he's alive, and he's still working in his own way. Emery ended the call with a heart full, not with sorrow, but with the weight of an unfinished story returning to the surface. She stepped out onto the wooden deck. Snow covered the steps like a soft sheet. In the distance, beneath an old pine at the edge of the clearing, Sable sat, just like the photos. Upright, still, head slightly tilted as if listening to something that wasn't the wind. She approached slowly, careful not to intrude. When she was close enough, she sat beside him, leaving space between them, enough to show she meant no demand, only presence. Sable, she said softly. He didn't turn, but his eyelids lowered slightly, acknowledging her. Gavin's still somewhere in your memory, isn't he? You never left your post. The dog didn't bark, but his ears twitched, like the ripple of a still lake when a voice from the deep is finally heard again. Emery pulled out her phone and brought up the first photo taken of Nora, when she lay wrapped in that soldier's coat in the snow. Around her wrist, the white plastic band with the name Nora still shone clearly. Maybe this was your final assignment, she whispered. One soul left behind in the storm, not to be called, but to be found by quiet presence. She stood up, didn't move closer, just turned and walked back toward the building. Sable remained exactly where he was, a sentinel without a command, without a badge. Only the silent promise that as long as there was a breath worth guarding, he would be there. The sky brightened over the snow, dawn stretching across the horizon in slow golden threads. The clinic hadn't yet stirred awake, but Emery was already in the staff room, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Images of Sable, of Nora, of Harriet and Sergeant Gavin Holt drifted through her thoughts like dreams that refused to fade. The landline rang, sharp and insistent. Emery set down her mug and picked up the receiver. Hallowed Ridge Clinic, Emery Lane speaking. On the other end, an older man's voice, urgent but clear. This is Ewan. I live near the spot where you found the child. I was out checking animal traps this morning when I saw some strange footprints in the snow. They look human, not animal. I think you should see them. Emery straightened. Near where we found the baby girl? Exactly. Western slope less than 300 meters from the main road. Please don't touch anything, Mr. Ewan. Ewan, I'm on my way. Less than 15 minutes later, the clinic's off-road vehicle turned onto the winding path toward the location Ewan described. Snow still lay thick on both sides, pines bent under the weight of the last storm creaking in the crisp morning breeze. The wind remained cold, but no longer cruel, as if the storm had finally exhaled. Ewan stood near a broken tree trunk, his walking stick planted like a marker. He pointed toward the snow. There. That print's not yours. Smaller foot. Thin sole. Looks like a woman. Emery crouched flashlight sweeping across the snowy surface. A clear shoe print. Narrow, slightly tilted, as if the person had been tired or freezing. She followed the prints, each step sinking deep into compressed snow. The tracks led up a shallow rise where the snow had caved in slightly, forming a shallow white depression. She stopped. A half dome of snow curved above a low hollow, just large enough for someone to curl up inside. Emery knelt again, hands gently brushing away the outer layer of snow. Inside was a body, a young woman. She wore an old charcoal gray wool coat frayed at the cuffs. Her hair, once blonde, now graying, tangled and frozen in strands that clung to the fabric around her shoulders. Her face was pale, but still carried the gentle lines of someone who had once smiled often. Her lips were slightly parted, tinted blue, as if they had tried to speak one last thing. Her eyes were closed, lashes dusted with frost. Emery held back a breath. Folded in the woman's hand was a small piece of paper. Carefully, she pried it free, doing her best to keep the damp parchment from tearing. The handwriting was rough, uneven, but clearly written with care. If someone finds me, please forgive me. I trusted the wrong person. I left my baby in the car to get supplies from the bag down the slope. And when I returned, the car was gone. I searched the forest all night, calling her name, until my body gave out. And then across the ridge I heard howling. I thought, maybe she was still alive. If my child survives, please call her Nora. Tell her her mother once held her with everything she had left. K. The world tilted slightly beneath Emery's feet. She clutched the paper to her chest, eyes closed, heart echoing with a silent scream that refused to rise. She raised her radio voice, hushed and low. Wes, prepare the body bag. I found the mother. There's a letter. She froze to death, but her body was curled in as if she had once shielded someone. That afternoon, the temporary clinic's cold storage held one more body wrapped in a white blanket. The local investigators confirmed her identity through documents found in her coat. Full name Kelsey Monroe, 25 years old. Recently registered to give birth at Missoula General, 7 weeks earlier. Emery laid her hand over the sealed envelope containing the letter. That piece of paper, a mother's final words, would be delivered one day to Nora's future guardian. She stepped out of the room and looked down the hall, where the late afternoon sun spilled through the glass window, lighting the pink blanket resting over Nora's tiny body. The child still slept, her cheeks now warm with color, her breath calm and steady. Beside her, Sable sat in his usual place, not too close, just near enough to see, near enough to guard. Wes stood silently beside them. That was her, wasn't it? Emery nodded. And the name Nora, it was her last gift. Wes rubbed his hand across the back of his neck. His voice cracked. That dog? If Sable hadn't found her in time. It's not if, Emery said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the window. It's because. Because Sable heard her. Because Sable came when it mattered. A soft breeze rustled the window. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, as if nature itself was bowing to a promise finally fulfilled. The next morning, when Emery stepped outside, she noticed a single perfect snowflake resting on the wooden step. Beside it, a paw print pressed deep, pointing toward the forest. By noon, the snowfall had stopped. The wind that once roared now passed gently over the clinic's tin roof, like a deep breath released after a storm. Emery sat alone in the records room at the far end of the hallway. Before her was a weathered letter, returned from forensic review. The paper was slightly wrinkled, one corner stiff with dried snow, but the ink remained bold. It was handwritten in black pen, the strokes firm, like someone who had once recorded patient notes with precision. Emery placed her fingers gently along the edge. Then she began to read. "If you are holding this letter, I may already be gone. Please, call her Nora." That was the name I chose the day I found out I was pregnant. My name is Cassandra Wyatt. I served as a combat medic, stationed in Syria and Afghanistan, before I was injured and reassigned to Montana. But my wounds didn't come from war. They came from someone I once trusted. He was a friend of my late husband. After the funeral, he offered to help me move, help me settle. Then one night, everything changed. I told no one. And when I became pregnant, I knew I had to leave the darkness. Emery paused, the breath caught in her throat. Light from the window struck the page, illuminating the next lines, as if they were being written in real time. I tried to report it, but red tape and overlapping jurisdictions let him slip through. I applied for help at the women's shelter in Missoula. But by then, I was showing. I was afraid. Afraid that if he found me, he'd claim custody. Not out of love, but to destroy what little I had left. So I ran. I carried a backpack, some formula cans, a bottle of water, and a fragile belief that maybe there was still a place in this world for kindness. Emery turned the page. The handwriting on this sheet leaned and trembled, written perhaps with fingers too numb to hold a pen steady. I saw Sable again on the third day in the forest. I recognized him instantly. Sable was once a K9 with the mountain search team. I'd seen him during a hospital transfer years ago. Back then, he lay beside a newborn's crib for 10 straight hours, never moving. When I cried out in labor, he was the first to turn his head. Then he ran to alert someone. Later, I heard he was lost in the Iron Veil collapse. But that day in the White Forest, he appeared again, fur frozen, one leg limping, but eyes steady. Just like before, I knew, if there was anyone in this world I could entrust my child to without saying a word, it was him. Emery closed her eyes and leaned her head gently against the cabinet behind her. In her mind, she saw Sable again, standing in the middle of the snow-swept road. He didn't bark, he didn't charge. He just looked and waited. She kept reading. I wrapped Nora in Gavin Holt's old coat, the man I once knew in the field. He used to say Sable never needed commands, just clarity of intention. I whispered to my baby, "You'll meet someone kind. I believe that. I'm leaving now, so pain can't touch you anymore." I didn't leave her because I gave up. I left her because I believed Sable would bring her into the light, and I chose a gentle death. Quiet, wordless, not angry, not loud. Just stepping away before some cruel hand could drag my child into the dark. If you can hold her every day, and if you can do more, please forgive me. A flawed mother, but one who loved with everything she had. The letter ended there. No signature. Just 3 final lines each, underlined with shaking ink nearly faded. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid she'd live in the wrong hands. If Sable remembers, then I believe loyalty never dies. That afternoon, when Emery stepped out from the records room, she found Wes sitting in the hallway, a cup of cocoa in hand. He looked up and asked quietly, "You read it?" She nodded. Her name was Cassandra Wyatt. She knew she was leaving, and chose to protect her daughter by going first. Wes's fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "And you believe that dog understood all of it?" Emery didn't answer right away. She glanced through the glass where Sable lay beside Nora's crib. head resting close, eyes half closed, yet watchful, breath slow and steady. "It's not belief anymore," she whispered. "I'm starting to learn to believe again, because of him." That night, the clinic slept like a river stilled by twilight. Warm light spilled through frosted glass, casting the shadow of a dog against the wall, always near a small sleeping form. And somewhere in that quiet, a vow remained, unbroken, that there would always be someone brave enough to keep the light alive for others. Snow fell again, light as ash drifting in morning sun. Outside Red Elk's clinic, the parking lot shimmered under a fresh sheet of frost, glinting like glass beneath the sky. In the small front office where Emery and Wes usually exchanged shifts, the wooden wall clock struck 8 as the main door swung open. A tall woman stepped inside, wrapped in a moss-colored coat, a wool scarf across her shoulders. Her face was wind-worn, her silver hair braided neatly behind her neck. In her arms, she carried a small wooden box and a weathered document pouch. Wes looked up first. "You're—" The woman smiled, her voice low but warm, like the glow of a hearth in early spring. "I'm Harriet Lang. I sent the message to Emery. I came because of Sable." The moment she said the name, Emery stood up from the admin office and stepped forward. Their eyes met, and in that glance was something strangely familiar, as if they had known each other for many winters, without ever having spoken. In the temporary storage room, now set up for quiet visitors, Harriet placed the wooden box on the table. "I've kept these since the last day I saw Sable," she said softly, her fingers brushing the edge of the lid. "Gavin gave them to me, just in case he didn't come back." Inside an old faded harness, a training tag engraved Sable, Infant Track and Rescue Unit, and a leather-bound field journal with worn corners. On the cover, Gavin Holt, Field Notes. Emery knelt carefully, lifting each item like they were relics from a story still waiting to be told. "It still smells like pine smoke," she murmured. Harriet nodded. "We worked together here in Hallowed Ridge, on the mission before the collapse. Sable had a specialized assignment detecting signs of life in infants. Most K9s respond to movement, sound, or the scent of blood. But Sable, he reacted to the faintest breath, the slightest warmth." Wes furrowed his brow, head tilted. "I've never heard of that before." Harriet continued, her eyes drifting toward memories that felt farther away than they were. Once during a night drill, a sensor doll was buried nearly a meter deep. The wind had scattered the earth. Everyone assumed we'd lost the target. But Sable, he stood a few meters away, then pawed at the ground. Exactly the right spot. Not even an inch off. She looked at Emery. "So when I saw the photo you posted, I knew it was him. Older, slower, fur matted with frost, limping. But the eyes, those eyes, I'd never mistake them." Emery brought out her tablet and pulled up the image, Sable standing in the snowy woods, the beam of a flashlight behind him, casting a long shadow onto the white. His silhouette, solid, still, certain. Harriet touched the screen, her hand lingering. "Yes, that's him. That's how he always stood when he found a breath, still fighting. He wouldn't bark, wouldn't leave, just waited for someone to come." Emery nodded, echoing what she'd told Wes days earlier. He doesn't need to be called, only heard. Sable was lying in this hallway outside the clinic room, his head resting near the bench, eyes as calm as a frozen lake. When Harriet approached, he lifted his head, not barking, not rushing, just looking. Quiet, steady. "I never thought I'd see you again, boy," Harriet whispered, kneeling down. "We searched for you for days after that collapse." Sable moved closer, pressing his nose into her palm. A soft breath escaped him, as if sighing after years of being lost. Emery stood back, letting the moment unfold untouched. Some memories she knew now didn't need to be spoken to remain whole. Gavin once said Harriet murmured if there was ever someone he couldn't reach in time, Sable would go in his place. Emery asked softly, "Do you think all of this, what happened, is tied to Gavin?" Harriet gave a slow nod. Gavin's death made Sable disappear. But maybe the mission inside him wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, as the sun rose just above the mountain's ridge like a glowing ember rolling across snow, Emery and Harriet sat together, flipping through Gavin's journal. Pages half filled, maps, behavior notes, K9 training insights. But near the final entry, written in ink blurred by water or tears, was a single line. "If I fall in the fire, Sable will go on, not because of command, but because of the trust written in his heart." Emery closed the journal, her eyes lifting toward the hallway where Sable lay near Nora's room, eyes half shut but ears gently twitching with every soft breath the baby exhaled. "There are some creatures," she whispered, "who don't need to be led. They just need the right moment of instinct to remember why they were born." That night before returning to her guest quarters, Harriet paused in front of the clinic's window. Inside, Nora slept peacefully. Sable remained in his familiar post, like a living gate guarding the dreams of something fragile and new. She placed her hand softly on the glass and murmured, "Thank you, Gavin. And thank you, Sable, for not stepping back when a child needed to be found." The Red Elk Fire Station sat midway up the town's slope, tucked behind rows of tall pines and a weathered wooden fence. In the snow season, the place looked suspended in time. Icicles on the red roof tiles, the fire engine still beneath a crumpled tarp. But inside, the fire in the hearth still burned, and the crew still rotated shifts as if some duties could never pause, even when the rest of the world did. Emery arrived on a windless afternoon. She carried with her Gavin Holt's notebook, the pages blurred with ink and weight, passed to her by Harriet. She didn't know why exactly she needed to come, only that something in her chest kept whispering the names of the man and the dog who vanished together in the collapse all those years ago. Inside, the main hall walls were covered in group photos of firefighters over the decades. Some faces had aged. Some were gone. Some Emery didn't recognize. But in the center hung one large photograph that quietly stood out. A young man, tall, uniform, crisp arm resting gently over the back of a German shepherd. The dog's black and tan coat caught the golden afternoon light, its eyes wide open, facing the camera. The man smiled, not like someone posing, but like someone who had just completed something deeply important. A voice spoke behind her. That photo was taken 3 weeks before the mine collapsed. Emery turned. An older man, broad-shouldered with silver in his hair and reading glasses hanging from his collar, stepped out from the hallway. His nameplate read, "Benson." "Emery Lane," she said. "I know. The clinic called to say you were the one who found the baby. And Sable." He gestured her toward the back lounge. The fireplace crackled softly, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and faint coffee. On the table sat a small tin frame, a photo of Gavin and Sable, more personal, less formal. Emery stared at it, then asked quietly, "Did he ever talk about Sable?" Benson smiled, though the lines at the corner of his eyes tightened. Gavin didn't need to. Everyone saw it. Those two were like a mirrored map. Nobody knew the mountain better than them. Every rescue, every drill, they moved like one. He stood and walked to a wooden cabinet, pulling out a small tin box. Inside were a few old photos, a frayed stuffed animal, and a child's handkerchief, faded but carefully folded. After Gavin's memorial, we planned to place a stone near the ridge where we found him. On the day we dug the foundation, someone discovered a small hole. Someone had buried a toy and a cloth next to the temporary grave. Deliberate, precise, like leaving behind something they couldn't say aloud. Benson sat down again, his voice lower now. That was Sable. After the collapse, he came back to that spot more than once. At first, we thought he was still looking for Gavin. But eventually, we understood. He knew Gavin was gone. He just needed a reason to keep going. Emery's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. Do you think he's still doing his job? Benson glanced toward the window. Snow had begun to fall again, soft, even like quiet breaths over time. I do. Men like Gavin and dogs like Sable, they don't need orders. They live by instinct. They search for whoever needs saving. That's enough. Emery thought of Nora. Wrapped in that soldier's coat, a wristband bearing the name Nora, kept warm beneath layers of snow like a seed waiting to bloom again. And the one who brought her back to this world was a dog who once buried a toy beside his fallen partner and vanished into the woods like a gust of wind. Have you ever wondered, she asked, if Sable's been watching over this town the whole time? Benson let out a quiet laugh. I've never stopped wondering. A few years ago, a toddler went missing in the park, barely 2 years old. Found curled up by a pine tree, frozen but alive. No one knew who placed him there, but there were dog prints around the base. Some of us thought it might have been Sable, but no one could say for sure. Emery nodded. Now I'm sure. Benson met her eyes. What do you plan to do next? She answered gently. I want to go back into the forest. One more time. Not to look for signs, but to understand. Before leaving, Emery paused again in front of the large photograph. Beside her, Benson said quietly, You know the last thing Gavin wrote in his journal? The day before the collapse, he opened to a dog-eared page. The handwriting leaned left, scribbled in haste. If something happens to me, I'm not afraid, because I know Sable will understand. And if he ever returns to this place, believe this. It won't be because of command. It will be because of a promise left unfinished. Emery took a deep breath. Her eyes glowed in the firelight, not with fleeting emotion, but with something steady rising from deep within. She knew, from that moment forward, that this journey wasn't over. Since the night of the snowstorm, when news spread that a newborn had been found in the forest and a mysterious dog had led the rescue, Red Elk had changed. Not with noise, not with celebration, but with a quiet reverence. Like something sacred had passed through, leaving behind a thin trail of light in every heart. Messages began to arrive. Some through the community app. Some he left as handwritten notes at the clinic. A few slipped under the door of Emery's cabin. All of them spoke of the same thing. A shadow in the snow appearing and disappearing so silently that many questioned if it was ever truly there. Do you remember the story about my daughter last year? She went missing 3 hours after our final spring skiing trip. We searched until we were exhausted. Eventually, they found her under the old church's rotting eaves. And around her, clear as day, were paw prints. Large, deep. Some years back, I almost hit a shadow on the mountain pass. Couldn't tell if it was a wolf or a dog. It just stood there, then vanished into the trees. That same night, patrol found a lost boy curled up under a pine, right where the shadow had turned. My grandmother used to say there was a dog at Hallowed Ridge, a dog that swore loyalty to the mountain. Every time a child's life was in danger, it would appear, silently, like a nameless guardian of the night. Emery read each of the testimonies slowly, turning every word from the townsfolk over in her mind. Each story was like a piece of a larger puzzle. She printed them out and pinned them to the whiteboard in the on-call room, next to the forest map's time logs of missing cases and discovery sites. The red dots started forming a pattern. Scattered, yes, but they all circled one edge of Hallowed Ridge, near the very spot where the old mine collapsed, where Gavin Holt lost his life. Someone, or more likely something, had never truly left. Wes Calder, her usually silent partner, stepped into the room just as Emery was posting another note. He raised an eyebrow. "You turning this into a local legends bureau?" She didn't laugh. She simply pointed at the map. "Do you see it?" Wes stepped closer, squinting. "These points curve like an old path. And it leads to the Ridge Tunnel," Emery whispered. "Where Gavin died, and where Sable vanished." Wes exhaled. "You think the dog is still guarding the route?" "Not guarding," she said. "Patrolling." A few days later, Emery and Harriet hiked the outer ridge of the mountain, carrying a map, a recording device, and something harder to name Hope. Slung over Harriet's shoulder was a worn canvas bag holding toys once used to train Sable, a stuffed duck, a pair of frayed baby socks, and a small blanket they had used to teach protective instincts. He had a habit of burying things, Harriet said, scanning the snowy mounds. Every time he completed a task well, he'd choose one object and hide it, like saying, "This mission I'm keeping." They crossed a sparse stretch of forest, where winter sunlight filtered through the snowy canopy like gentle beams in an old cinema. Under a fallen log where the snow was oddly thinned, Emery knelt and found it. A child's scarf folded small, buried beneath a handful of dried pine needles. There were no fresh tracks, but the scarf was clean, too clean to be random. Harriet stared, her voice low, as if speaking to the earth itself. "He's still working," she murmured, silently, never needing anyone to see. That night, as snow began to fall again, Emery and Wes met at the town's last open cafe, where the lights were always warm and two lazy cats slept beside the radiator. A young waitress brought them hot chocolate and leaned in with a whisper. "I added a little pastry for the special guest." Wes lifted a brow. "What guest?" The girl nodded toward the window. Outside near the roadside hedge stood a faint silhouette, low to the ground, strong in posture, ears alert. Still and watching through the snow, no one said a word. Only the street lamp touched the edge of its damp fur, casting light on a coat that had aged into shades of brown and gray, as if dusted by time itself. It stood a moment longer, as if checking. "You're still here?" "So am I." Then it turned and disappeared quietly into the darkness. That night, Emery opened her journal and wrote in delicate strokes. "There are journeys that require no audience, footsteps that carry lives on their back, without ever asking to be seen. And even if outside was cold, silent, or buried in snow, Emery knew, deep in the forest, someone still patrolled. Not out of duty, not for glory, but because a child's gaze might one day look up, waiting to be saved. In a small room where winter light crept softly through thin curtains, baby Nora lay bundled in a makeshift crib, gently assembled from wool blankets and clean hand-sewn sheets. Her cheeks glowed with a pale blush, her lips barely parted, curled like she was keeping a secret all her own. Her eyes blinked slowly, still learning how to meet the world. But when they opened, they held a depth beyond understanding, innocence, fragility, and something unspoken. Emery Lane sat beside her holding a warm milk bottle. She tilted it gently toward Nora's lips. The baby furrowed her brows, then accepted it, swallowing steadily, as if absorbing all the warmth Emery had poured into her palms. No one had told Emery she had to do this. But every morning, the first thing she did was listen. Was Nora breathing evenly? Was her wrap perfectly aligned? She counted those breaths like someone counting the cracks in a broken heart. 6 years ago, Emery had lost her own child. A single turn on the snowy pass, a slip of the wheel, had taken her baby boy at only 3 months old. And since the moment his heart stopped beating, Emery had buried her own sense of faith alongside him. But now, as she watched Nora breathe, she didn't feel like a nurse. She felt like a guardian. Whenever Nora cried, not loudly, just faint whimpers that trembled in her throat, a familiar presence appeared at the door, Sable. The old German shepherd, now streaked with silver along his back, still walked with quiet strength. He needed no summons, no signals. Every sound Nora made seemed to register in a kind of hearing beyond the ears, one rooted deep in the heart. He'd pad to her crib, lie down, turn his back to the world, and rest his chin over his paws, positioned like a shield between her and anything that could harm her. Sometimes Emery would sit quietly in the corner of the room, just watching. There were no words, just presence. A woman whose soul had once shattered. A dog who had lost his partner and vanished into the mountains. And in between, an infant like a small miracle slowly waking to the world. Harriet stepped in with a small gift bag. Inside were a few newborn clothes freshly laundered and fragrant with lavender. She placed it on the table and silently took in the scene before her. "He's lying like that again?" Harriet murmured, pouring herself a cup of hot tea. Emery gave a small nod. "Every time Nora stirs or whimpers in her sleep, he comes. Never in a rush, never anxious, just always right on time." Harriet's gaze drifted to Sable's paws. Back at the training center, they used to call Sable the kennel's shadow. No matter how harsh the drills got, if there was a baby in the room, he'd find a way to lie nearby guarding their sleep. The trainers joked sometimes. He may not learn as fast as the others, but his heart runs ahead of them all. Emery smiled. A quiet, genuine smile, the first one in weeks, that didn't feel forced or tight with grief. She leaned down and gently brushed her fingers behind Nora's ear, where her soft baby hairs curled like drifting mist. The child pursed her lips, tilting her head toward the warmth instinctively. Night fell. Wind slipped through the cracks of the wooden walls, carrying with it the deep breath of the mountains, solemn yet tender, like a lullaby. Nora was asleep, and Sable remained, without leaving her side for even a moment. Emery lit a small lamp by the bed. The amber glow spread gently across Sable's back, over his crossed front paws, and onto the tiny crib where Nora's breaths rose and fell in rhythm. Emery didn't leave the room right away. She stayed seated, fingers brushing across an old notebook. On the worn page she wrote, "Perhaps I'm no longer afraid of losing, because I am holding something, not just for myself, but for a life that needs continuing. And maybe I was never truly alone." In that fleeting moment, when the wind outside paused as if to listen, Nora opened her eyes. She looked upward, slowly scanning the room, until her gaze rested on the old dog guarding her dreams. No one had taught her his name, but in her eyes there was something that looked like recognition. People often say some storms pass without thunder, only through a child's eyes. And Nora's eyes, the girl found in snow, saved by a heart that knew how to wait, were where the storm had begun to quiet. A storm called survival. The snow had melted just enough to reveal the dark earth beneath, where scorched tree roots still twisted like bones, left behind after a long dreaming sleep. Around Hallowed Ridge, the site of a wildfire 4 years ago, the land lay silent like a massive graveyard. Trees were returning one patch at a time, but the wounds in the soil remained. Emery walked slowly behind Wes and Harriet. The cold wind slipped past her thick coat, carrying with it the faint acrid scent of old ash. Bitter, but honest. Sable hadn't joined them on this trip. They had left him with Nora as a quiet acknowledgement that his heart belonged there now. As for them, the ones who owed something to memory, they had to return to where it began. "This is the place," Harriet said, voice low as a breath, "where Gavin fell, right after saving the two who were trapped in the rocks." Wes glanced around. No marker. You'd think they'd place something where someone gave their life. "There was," Harriet replied. But rain and ice wore it down. Sable never needed a marker anyway. Wherever Gavin once stood, that's etched deeper in him than any sign could ever be. Emery knelt and gently brushed aside a thin layer of moss. Beneath it, there was a paw print, clear and full, pressed into the damp soil as if it had just been left there. The size, unmistakable. The depth of the ankle suggested heaviness, a sign of old age. Yet the direction of the steps remained steady, like everyone had purpose. "These are Sable's prints," Emery said softly. He came back. Wes moved closer, sweeping his flashlight across the ground. Something caught the light. He stepped forward, crouched, and carefully lifted it from the wet earth. A half-burned photograph. One side was blurred edges singed, but the remaining half was heartbreakingly intact. Gavin Holt, dressed in his bright orange rescue uniform, cradling a training infant doll. His face, beamed eyes looking straight into the camera. The doll was wrapped in a swaddle, a small plastic tag on its wrist reading "Practice Infant, Alpha Team." Harriet brought a hand to her mouth. "I remember this." Gavin was doing his final field test with Sable. The scenario was a collapsed site infant evacuation. Sable had to sniff out and lead the way. He found the baby in 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Wes flipped the photo. On the back, scribbled in permanent marker, April 17th, Station 6. Sable 100% infant response score. Emery went still. The wind swept through broken branches, tossing a few brittle leaves into the air. To her, the half-burned photo, with its scorch marks and blurred ink, felt exactly like Sable's heart. One half worn away by time and loss, the other still holding the face of the one he once called partner. Family. "Sable brought Nora here," Emery said, her voice certain, like she had just unearthed something far greater than instinct. "He didn't just find her in the snow. He brought her home, back to the place where he once learned how to save a child." Wes nodded slowly, as if everything that's happened was a circle he's been quietly completing. Harriet bent down and picked up a torn fragment of the photo. Sable never learned how to forget. He only learned how to wait. She looked straight at Emery, and this time he waited long enough for a life that was real. On the walk back to the truck, snow began to fall, soft and thin. The sun had already slipped behind the distant mountains, leaving behind a quiet pink glow like the last light of memory. Emery walked in silence, the photo clutched in her hand. She knew that tomorrow she'd reprint it, frame it in simple wood, and place it beside Nora's crib, not to remind the child of someone named Gavin or an old training drill, but so she could grow up surrounded by the things no one teaches: presence, instinct to protect, and loyalty that expects no reward. Because in this world, not everyone wears a uniform, and not every guardian needs a name. But there are some beings who only need to place themselves beside a fragile life to remind us that there are still reasons to return. That some footprints, even when unseen, always lead toward the light. From the slope that wound back into red elk dusk began painting a thin veil of violet across the distant peaks. The sun sank halfway behind a charred tree line, casting a band of orange that burned in reverse. Soft, silent, stripped of heat. Against that backdrop, 3 silhouettes stretched long on the path. Emery, Wes, and Harriet, each walking quietly, each adrift in their own thoughts. The truck was parked near the forest's edge. They were nearly there when something moved, and all three stopped in their tracks. On the moss-covered slope, a shadow appeared. No sound, no urgency. It simply emerged as if it had been waiting there all along. Sable. The dark coat of the German shepherd was now threaded with silver around his ears and chest. The light of sunset washed over his fur with a bronze-like glow. His steps were slow, composed, carrying the quiet strength of a soul that had lived long enough to write its final chapter with grace. Sable didn't wag his tail. He didn't look at any of them. He simply walked steadily toward Emery, or more precisely toward the item cradled in her arms, the scorched photograph of Gavin Holt. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the wind paused, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Sable stopped just shy of touching her. He lowered his head slightly, ears relaxed. Then slowly, he lifted his nose and gently touched the corner of the frame, right where Gavin's face had remained intact. It wasn't a nuzzle of curiosity, nor a gesture of greeting. It was something else, a return, a promise kept through 4 long years, a vow once whispered over a gravesite, a tether between a dog and the soldier buried beneath frozen soil. And when his nose pulled away, Sable exhaled. Not a long breath, not a trembling one, just deep, steady, peaceful, as if a burden had just been lifted from his chest. Then he lay down at Emery's feet beside the photograph. He didn't curl up for warmth. He didn't rest his head on anyone's leg. He simply stretched out legs, extended, eyes turned toward the forest where the sun was retreating. Behind her, Harriet stood still, her hand gripping her bag strap. Wes removed his wool cap and bowed his head. Emery, her heart pulled tight by an emotion too vast to name, sank to her knees beside him, placed the photograph gently on the ground, and stroked Sable's head with care. He didn't close his eyes, but his breathing grew slower, deeper, as if in this moment the world had granted him rest. "You brought Gavin home," Emery whispered. Sable gave no reply. He didn't need to, because some missions never seek applause. Some promises are honored in silence and returned with quiet grace. Night settled slowly, and the air grew colder. They didn't ask Sable to stand. They didn't lift him. Instead, the 3 of them stayed by his side like stones around the base of an old pine. There was no fire, but warmth found its way there, drawn not from flame, but from the quiet presence they all shared. Maybe. Wes murmured he never needed to be found, just recognized. Harriet nodded, still watching Sable. "I used to think he ran away because he was broken, but now I see. It wasn't escape. It was waiting for the right moment to finish what was left undone." Emery clutched the small plastic bracelet that once belonged to little Nora, the one Sable had led them to on that storm-torn night. The bracelet's glow caught the moonlight for a moment. If anyone's ever managed to hold on to a soul between 2 worlds, she whispered, between the gone and the still here, "It's him." Above them, a faint band of stars stretched across the ridge. The grass around their feet stirred gently with the breeze, carrying the scent of moss and old wood. Sable remained still, eyes partly closed, not asleep, but listening for something farther away. Perhaps the footsteps of Gavin, perhaps the heartbeat of Nora in a quiet room, or perhaps the final sound loyalty needs before it can let go. One morning in mid-April, the world turned calm as a still lake. The snow that had once blanketed Red Elk receded, revealing the soft curve of meadows below. New green pushed up from the edge of the woods, as if the earth had grown weary of winter and was ready to breathe again. Emery stepped out of the clinic, her coat unbuttoned. The wind under the porch carried no sting. From the rooftop opposite, the last patches of ice melted in slow, steady drops, falling like a heartbeat counted in silence. Today was the day Cassandra would be laid to rest. Nora's mother. The woman who wrote letters in the snow. The woman who placed her tiny daughter in Sable's care. With nothing more than faith and no one left to promise anything in return. The state investigators had confirmed it all. The DNA from her body matched archived military records. The suicide letter, the handwriting, the battlefield nurse certification. It all came together, piecing back a life that once seemed swallowed by the white storm. Cassandra Monroe, 29. Once served with a frontline trauma unit. Quiet, disciplined, a service record nearly 2 pages long, vanished after leaving PTSD treatment. And then, found here, in the heart of a blizzard, holding a child beside a dog believed long gone. The funeral took place on Windhill Ridge, the small cemetery west of town where Red Elk's families had buried their loved ones for generations. Not many attended. Only those who had walked this road, Emery West Harriet Captain Benson, a few volunteer medics, and Sable. Harriet led him there, one patient step at a time. The old dog seemed to understand this was a final farewell he needed to attend. He didn't stay behind. He didn't seek comfort. Sable walked to the front, stopped at the plain pine casket, and rested his paw gently on the grass beside it before sitting down in silence. No bark, no restless breath. Just a silhouette aged by time, still as a sentinel at the threshold between the living and the gone. Emery stood to the side, hands clasped. Inside her chest, the feeling wasn't pain, but weight. Not sharp, just a quiet tide that rose and rose, soft but constant. In her hands, Emery held a small plastic bracelet with the name Nora engraved on it. It had already been replaced with an official hospital ID, yet she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It was more than plastic. It was a witness to the night everything began, when a fragile breath surfaced beneath the white snow. Harriet read aloud a short passage from the letter Cassandra had left behind. Her voice was slow, round with emotion, as though each word needed to sink gently into the earth. If anyone finds this letter, please forgive my choice. I had nowhere left to go. But she didn't. She deserves to live, if someone finds her. And if the one who finds her is the dog I met, I trust he'll know where to go. Harriet paused, lowering the letter. Her eyes turned to Sable. Sable carried that final request, she said softly. And today, I believe Cassandra is watching. A light breeze passed above their heads, loosening the last clumps of snow from the sparse treetops. The flakes fell slowly, silently, like a farewell with no need for words. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed in quiet waves. A few purple flowers had been laid beside the newly set grave. The grass was still dry and yellowed from winter, but right next to the stone a single green sprout had emerged. Sable hadn't moved. He lay at the edge of the grave, his head resting gently on his front paws. His eyes remained half-closed, ears flicking now and then at rustling sounds in the nearby pines. Emery stepped closer and sat down beside him. You once stood by a soldier, she said. Now you're beside a mother. Sable opened his eyes, looking at her for a moment. Then he closed them again, as if to say, yes, that's exactly right. Quietly, Emery placed the Nora bracelet along the edge of the stone. The wind carried the scent of new grass, and in that moment, between earth and sky and stillness, a gentle feeling began to bloom, as if spring had truly arrived. That afternoon, the sun returned in full. The small lake near the medical outpost began to thaw, revealing its silver-gray surface like a mirror yet to be wiped clean. Emery sat on the porch with baby Nora curled in her arms, wrapped in a soft fleece blanket. Infants may not remember, but their bodies do. And as Sable slowly approached and settled beside Emery's feet, Nora didn't cry. Her tiny hand reached out first, brushing against Emery's knee, then gently, curiously touching Sable's back. Sable didn't flinch. He turned his head slightly toward the baby, then stretched forward and pressed his nose lightly to the back of her hand. It was a touch so soft it didn't startle her, but warm enough to linger in memory. The skies over Red Elk were unusually clear. After weeks of nothing but clouds and snow, the sunlight now poured gently through the windows of the medical cabin, where Emery stood beside Nora's crib. The baby slept soundly, her hands curled near her rosy cheeks. The dryness on her lips had faded the bluish tint on her skin, now replaced with warm, healthy tones. Something in the rhythm of her breathing made it hard for Emery to look away, like time itself refused to move forward without her witness. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. Then came a soft knock, and the door opened. Harriet entered with 2 mugs of hot tea. A scent of ginger and cinnamon floated through the room. "Emery," she said gently, "would you mind sitting for a moment?" Emery nodded, and they moved to the resting area. An old armchair sat by the window, sunlight spilling across a worn-out rug someone had woven many years ago. Harriet set down the tea and took a seat across from her. A quietness settled over the room, broken only by the creak of the chair as Emery shifted her weight. "This isn't easy to say," Harriet began, "and I hope you don't think I'm here to take anything away from you." Emery tilted her head slightly, waiting. "I used to know Cassandra," Harriet continued, "back when we were both in the field hospital. We weren't the kind of friends who called every week, but we shared bandages, stitched wounds together, split rations during bombing raids. That kind of bond doesn't vanish." Emery's eyes softened. She understood the kind of connection forged in war. Even short moments left a lifetime's mark. "She once told me about her dream," Harriet went on. "A house with a porch big enough for a bench, a garden with a white fence, and a dog lying beside her baby girl's cradle." Harriet smiled faintly. "I remember thinking, anyone who can still dream of those things after the battlefield must have a strong heart." Emery turned her teacup gently in her hands. "I lost a niece once," Harriet said quietly. "Since then I've lived alone. But when I saw Sable curled up next to Nora, I saw that dream Cassandra described. Exactly. As if this little girl was the last thing she left behind. And also a request never spoken out loud." Her voice grew quieter yet steady. "If no one steps forward, if there are no legal relatives, I'd like to adopt them both, Nora and Sable." Emery blinked. Her heart dropped into a tender, aching stillness. Surprised but also washed with a strange relief. She had thought about it. She'd even told Wes that if no one came forward, if no file ever matched, she would file for adoption herself. She wasn't afraid of the midnight cries or the sleeves with no one to help her put on. She only feared that this tiny hand might one day be taken away again. Harriet didn't wait for a reply. She reached into her bag and handed Emery an old photograph. In it stood a young Cassandra, her hair tied back, smiling beside Harriet. Both wore medical uniforms, grinning in front of a field hospital made of canvas and wooden crates. "You don't have to answer now," Harriet said. "I just want you to know, I'm not here to take anyone away. I want to share. If you decide to keep the baby here, I'll help in any way I can. But if you feel the best place for her to begin again, then I'll be ready to carry that part of the journey." Emery stared long at the photo. Something in Cassandra's smile, that mixture of strength and gentleness, stirred old feelings in her. And something in Harriet's voice reminded her some people don't need blood ties to love like family. "Do you think," Emery whispered, "that what a child needs is a place to call home, or simply people who won't walk away?" Harriet didn't answer right away. She turned to the window where light skimmed through her silver hair like a thin veil of smoke. "Wherever someone truly chooses to stay," she said softly, "that place is already home, whether it has a name or not." Emery gave a quiet nod. She didn't know where the paperwork would lead tomorrow, how the system would classify little Nora, or what decision the social workers might eventually make. But in this very moment, beneath the tender April sunlight and the steady breath of an old dog resting quietly outside the nursery, Emery felt she could believe in one thing: Nora would have someone who chose to stay. Whether that someone was Emery, or Harriet, or a dog who had once waited under snow for 3 long days, just to keep a promise made by someone no longer here. Morning light stretched through the wooden window frame, casting a soft glow across the dark wood floor inside the small cabin. The room lay in a stillness so gentle it felt sacred. The kind of quiet only places touched by loss truly understand. In the corner beside a crib near the eastern wall lay an old dog, his curled shape, familiar head resting on crossed front paws, ears drooping slightly with age. It was Sable. The once shiny coat had faded to a soft gray, and though thinner now, his frame still held the quiet readiness of a sentinel. But there was something different in him today. The usual alertness in his gaze had softened, like the golden hush that follows fire when the land begins to breathe again. Nora slept peacefully in the crib, her tiny body rising and falling in a rhythm as steady as snow melting beneath a morning sun. She stirred once, arms stretching gently, her face loosening into the kind of calm expression only infants have when they dream of things they've never seen, but somehow already know. Sable didn't move. His eyes followed every breath she took. Sunlight angled in through the wooden bars of the window, filtering down into pale golden streaks across the floor. One ray touched Sable's nose. He blinked, and for a fleeting moment, his weary eyelids closed, as if holding onto a dream only he understood. Emery stepped into the room quietly. She wore a thin gray sweater, her hair tied up, a mug of tea in her hands she hadn't yet tasted. Her gaze settled on the crib, and on the dog curled beside it. She didn't say his name. She didn't reach out to wake either of them. She just stood there, watching in silence. There are moments she knew when it's best not to interfere. This was one of them. A woman who had carried a fracture in her heart for 7 long years. A child, just shy of 3 months old. And a dog who had waited across 4 snow-covered seasons for something that finally made sense. They hadn't planned to meet. They weren't destined by any rule. But somehow these 3 lost pieces had found where they belonged, quietly locking into place like fragments of a once broken world coming together again. Outside, pine branches swayed in the breeze. A small sparrow landed on the window ledge and let out a soft song, the kind of sound that gently confirms winter has finally passed. Sable let out a slow, deep breath. It wasn't the breath of exhaustion, but the kind that comes when someone lets go of a burden they've carried too long in silence. His belly flattened with the exhale, then rose and fell again, steady, calm, at peace. Emery moved closer and sat beside the crib. She reached out and gently touched the fur near Sable's ear. The dog didn't turn his head, but his ear twitched just slightly, as if to say he understood. "Nora's asleep," Emery whispered, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. Still, Sable didn't move, but his tail, dry, thin, with bones pressing through worn fur, gave one gentle wag. Just one. Emery smiled, a look full of warmth and gratitude. Some creatures are trained to serve, like Sable once, a rescue K9. But there are things beyond training, beyond time, beyond loss. Things like instinct, the silent drive to preserve life, and a trust so deep that even when the world feels broken, it survives in a heart that needs no words to speak. Sable didn't need to understand what had happened. He only knew this child needed someone to stay, and he gave everything he had left to do exactly that. Above them, Nora shifted in her sleep. A soft sigh escaped her lips, and one tiny hand slipped out from under the blanket's edge. Sable stretched forward just a little, and with quiet precision, tapped the baby's hand with his nose. Just enough for her to pull it back beneath the warm cotton fold. Just like the old days, back when Sable trained at the K9 Center, when children were brought in so he could learn to sense the delicate presence of life. Gavin used to say, he doesn't follow commands, he follows heartbeats. And now in this humble wooden room, even though he couldn't hear a thing, Sable remained still, listening for something smaller than sound. Listening for the tiny rhythm of life pulsing through a fragile body, still discovering the world. A breeze slipped in, lifting the corner of the curtain. The light shimmered like waves across the floor. Emery looked up. Her eyes stung, not from the wind, but because she had just witnessed something unspoken, something that cracked her heart open once more. This time not from pain, but because life was pouring in again. Outside on the porch, Harriet tended the fire. From a distance, Wes approached holding a tin of butter-scented cookies. He called out, "Is she okay?" Emery answered softly, her gaze still fixed on the crib. "She's okay. Because someone chose to stay. For good." That afternoon, the sky was strangely clear. A late spring day where the wind had shed its chill, just brisk enough for a light sweater, just quiet enough to make people pause before the solemn beauty of Hallowed Ridge. The pines had already begun to regrow their bright green tips rising from the cold soil, as if to remind everyone that even frozen memories can become new beginnings. The townspeople of Red Elk gathered in a small circle, just a few dozen, mostly rescue volunteers, nurses, social workers, and those who had once crossed paths with Sable during the years when no one quite knew he was still alive. There were no cameras, no loudspeakers, no lengthy speeches. They came as if answering an invitation no one had written down, because what needed to be said had already been told, in a different way. In the center of the clearing, where snow once lay thick and quiet, stood a newly raised wooden plaque. It was made from coarse pine sanded smooth by hand. The inscription had been carved with bare tools, each line bearing the tremble of emotion. There was no name of a person, no name of a dog, just a single line for the one who carried more than weight. No lengthy tribute, no list of achievements. But those who stood before it found themselves silent, because everyone knew that Dog had carried more than a child on his back. He bore a promise left unfinished, a piece of memory yet unnamed, and a love so quiet it rose above the bounds of language. Harriet stood beside Emery, clutching her light scarf, her gaze fixed on the plaque. On the other side, Wes stood slightly hunched, as if shielding the baby cradled in Emery's arms. Little Nora sleeping soundly in a soft sling, her breath rising gently against the chest that held her close. Captain Benson was the only one who stepped forward. In his hand, he held a bouquet of wildflowers. He said nothing, just laid the flowers at the base of the plaque and bowed deeply, once. Then he stepped back, giving space to a familiar figure. Sable. The dog, older now, his back sunken, his legs unsteady, emerged from the crowd as if he understood this moment belonged to him. No one called him. No one led him. He moved slowly toward the plaque, his eyes fixed ahead, not looking for anyone, but for something deeper that lingered in the air. Sable stopped before the wooden slab. He looked up, one breath. Then gently he sat down, head slightly bowed, tail resting softly on the ground. No explanation needed, no applause, no tears. In that moment, he became the living embodiment of what the inscription meant, a silent soul who had carried what no other could bear, and chose still to remain. Harriet squeezed Emery's hand and whispered, "Perhaps in the end, loyalty is the only thing that endures." Emery gave a quiet nod. In her arms, baby Nora stirred slightly, then drifted back into sleep, as if the words unspoken were a lullaby she could still hear. Sable leaned forward, using what strength he had left, to gently touch the base of the wooden plaque with his nose. Just one light touch. Then he turned slowly, retreating from the circle's center. Above them, sunlight pierced through the trees, painting the ground with scattered streaks of light that looked like footprints in motion. On the ride back to town, the truck moved slowly. No one spoke. Not out of sorrow, but because each person was holding close a piece of what they had just witnessed, that in this loud, hurried life, the most beautiful stories were still written in silence. And some main characters, whose names may never be spoken, leave marks deeper than in any written history. Far behind them, the wooden plaque stood at an angle beneath the evening sun. Its shadow stretched across the earth, not just the shadow of a thing, but of a memory. Nameless, but eternal. By the second summer since the snow had melted, the forest around Red Elk was flooded with sunlight as if it had never known cold. Shafts of light filtered through thick pines, wrapping the ground in golden ribbons that gently embraced each tiny footstep of little Nora as she toddled across the damp grass in front of the cabin. Emery sat on the wooden steps, a nurse's notebook resting unfinished in her lap, but her eyes never strayed from the child. Every step Nora took felt sacred, not simply because she was learning to walk, but because she never walked alone. Beside her was always that familiar black and tan shadow, calm and steady, moving bit by bit as though woven into the very fabric of time. It was Sable now, far older than before. The fur around his muzzle had turned silver patches along his hips, had grown thin, and his steps were slow, deliberate, like those of an old man. But those eyes, the ones that followed Nora's every move, remained unchanged, clear, strong, unwavering. Nora had only been walking for a week. She could barely say a few words, but her small hands instinctively knew where to reach. And sometimes she simply walked, trusting that someone would be beside her, and that someone was always Sable. Wes once joked, "She doesn't follow instinct. She follows Sable's breath." Harriet often sat nearby with a book in hand, watching. When Nora stumbled, she didn't rush in. She only tilted her head, because most of the time Sable had already stepped forward, placing himself gently in front of the child like a living, breathing cushion. And if Nora cried, he simply sat head slightly tilted, gaze calm. Not worried, but patient, because he believed she would rise again just like all the times before. That afternoon, the breeze passed through the mountain pass, carrying the scent of young grass mixed with pine. Overhead, a flock of birds traced a crescent across the sky, drawing arcs for dreams yet unnamed. Nora wandered toward the low grass where wild daisies bloomed freely. Her steps wobbled, the tiny legs barely keeping balance. But before her little hand could meet the earth, Sable stepped forward, dipped his head, and let her fall gently onto his back like a living pillow. Her laughter bubbled through the quiet. Emery smiled. It was the first smile in weeks that wasn't wrapped in fatigue or worry. She closed her notebook, rose to her feet, and walked toward the two souls before her, one just beginning life, and one whose journey was slowly drawing to a close. Sable, she called softly. The dog lifted his head. His ears, though worn with age, still perked with instinct. His eyes, still mirrors of June sunlight, reflected off an old silent lake. Nora waved a small hand toward Emery. "Mama." Emery leaned down, scooped the child into her arms, and felt the warmth of a life that had once been no more than a fragile breath under the snow. But then Nora leaned back, looking around. "Babo." It was what she always said when she couldn't see Sable. "Sable's here," Emery whispered, turning. only to find him already seated behind them in the shade beneath the tree, like a quiet sentry at the door, unasked, unthanked, but always there. At night, once Nora had drifted into sleep inside the crib, placed by the wooden window, Sable was still there, lying just beneath it. The silhouette of the pine tree outside cast shadows through the glass, weaving a net of memories across the wooden floor. The wind stirred gently, carrying with it the soft creaks of the old roof, sounds long familiar to those who lived there. Harriet laid an extra blanket across Sable's back. "He gets cold more easily now," she murmured, as if only to herself. Sable didn't respond. He simply opened his eyes, glanced around the room, and closed them again. There was no weariness in that gaze, only stillness. The kind of stillness belonging to someone who had already fulfilled what needed to be done, and was now watching over something greater than himself. From the doorway, Emery stood silently. She looked at the child curled in peaceful sleep and the loyal old dog resting close by. No words spoken, only the steady sound of breath marking time. The next morning, just as sunlight spilled gold across the porch, Nora bolted out of bed and toddled toward the yard. Her first word of the day wasn't Mama, nor was it Dada. It was Bo. And the black and tan figure beneath the crib, still there, slowly lifted himself up, shook off the stiffness in his limbs, and followed. That morning the sun rose early and gentle like a sheer cloth laid across the roof tiles. Spring usually came late to Red Elk, but this year it felt as though the earth had softened. Sooner hearts had lightened a bit more, making everything easier to breathe in and easier to forgive. Emery pushed open the wooden window. The creak of the hinges was as familiar as a whispered memory. Dew still clung to the leaves. The sunlight reached down across the grass where little Nora played alone with pebbles and short sticks. She could speak more now, laugh louder, fall less. And even when she did fall, she knew how to stand without being helped. Yet with every step, every pause, she would turn her head to seek a shape that had never once left her side. Sable lay just a few meters away, under the willow they had planted the year before. His eyes remained open, his back slightly curled ears no longer perked as high as they once were, but still turned in the direction of her laughter. Whenever Nora laughed too hard, Sable would lift his head just a little, marking her place in the quiet map of his world. He didn't run anymore. He didn't stand for long, but he was always there. From the window above, Emery watched it all. The distance close enough to hear every giggle, yet far enough to see the full picture, a child growing up and an aging soul keeping vigil beside her. Wes had once asked, "How much longer do you think Sable has?" Emery didn't answer. She never thought of it as a number. Sable didn't live by time. He existed by presence, by the way he always looked up just when Nora tripped, by how he quietly stepped around the rocks she hadn't yet noticed. His being there wasn't to do something. It was to be something. A part of the air, the scenery, the heart. Nora was now trying to line up her little stones. She counted with unsteady sounds, pointing her fingers and speaking syllables that didn't yet form words. When one pebble rolled out of place, she looked around, saw Sable, and giggled, "Boy. Help na." Sable didn't understand human speech, but he lifted his head, braced his front legs, and turned his body toward her. Nora didn't wait. She ran to him, plopped down beside him, and patted his back like a dear old friend. Sable didn't move. He simply blinked, gently stretched his neck forward, and licked her forehead. A soft touch that made the child laugh out loud, like wind chimes in a quiet sky. From the upstairs window, Emery placed a hand on the wooden frame eyes, watching them. She exhaled slowly and whispered, just loud enough for the wind to catch. "You didn't have to be here to be called a hero." The breeze passed through, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and new leaves. She continued, "You only had to be here, and you were." And it was that presence, silent and unwavering, that had changed everything. It had saved a child. It had touched a heart once broken. It had fulfilled a final promise for a soldier who never made it home. And most of all, it had remained even when everything else could have faded away. That evening, Nora fell asleep early. She lay curled in Emery's arms, shifting slightly at the soft click of the closing window. Down by the floor, Sable lay by the foot of the bed, his head resting on the plush rug. No command had been given, no lesson taught. Yet he knew exactly where he belonged, as though it had been written into him the moment he first met the little girl. Emery sat there for a long time, one hand resting on the dog's back, gentle and steady, the way someone touches something they aren't ready to let go of, even as it begins to slip quietly away. Sable breathed softly, a long, slow rhythm, his eyes closed. But in that closing there was no sign of departure, only the quiet shutting of a door once everything inside had been made whole. Emery whispered one final time, "Thank you for staying." And outside, the amber glow of the lamp shone through the window, casting onto the wall a familiar black and tan silhouette. No name needed. Still there. Forever. Some stories aren't meant to end with applause, because what lingers is not the climax, but the quiet, steady things full of meaning. The story of Sable, a former German Shepherd search and rescue K9, isn't one of dramatic action or grand missions. It is a story of presence of a four-legged soul who chose to stay behind, silently fulfilling a final vow to his fallen handler, and in doing so, gave a newborn girl a chance at life in the snow. German Shepherds are known for their intelligence, loyalty, and courage. But more than their working skills, it's their hearts that touch ours the most. Sable never needed orders. He never waited for rewards. He just needed a reason to stay. And sometimes that reason is as simple as the fragile cry of a child carried on the wind. This story reminds us that loyalty doesn't need to be named to exist. Love doesn't always begin with blood, and real miracles sometimes come on four legs, walking slowly, but never turning away from what they believe is right. If you have a dog, look again. You may not just be living with an animal. You may be walking beside a soul who knows how to love in silence.